All right, if I was counting accurately in my head, I think we are live. Welcome everyone out there in Zoomlandia, Brooklyn, or anywhere else. I'm Nick Mancusi. Welcome to today's panel. It's called Icons of American Culture, featuring Nelson George, Emily Nemens, and Curtis Sittenfeld. Let me just tell you a little bit about the way this will work. I'll introduce each author, I'll read their bios, then they'll each read very briefly, about 3 minutes each from their books. Then I'll throw out a few questions for us to discuss as a panel. And then finally, we can open it up to some Q&A, which I believe anyone watching at home will be able to submit via the chat or ask a question feature of your Zoom window there. So maybe, feel free to throw those out as we discuss, and I'll hopefully be able to collect them at the end. So yeah, I'll start by reading everyone's bio. Nelson George is a celebrated writer and filmmaker whose best-selling books include The Death of Rhythm and Blues and Hip Hop America. He directed the HBO film Life Support with Queen Latifah and a documentary on dancer Misty Copeland, A Ballerina's Tale. George has written 4 previous novels in the D. Hunter mystery series: The Accidental Hunter, The Plot Against Hip Hop, The Lost Treasures of R&B, and To Funk and Die in LA. His latest novel, The Darkest Hearts, was published in August. Emily Nemens is the editor of the Paris Review. She was previously the co-editor of the Southern Review. Her work has been published in Esquire, N+1, the Gettysburg Review, Hobart, and elsewhere, and her debut novel is titled The Cactus League. Curtis Sittenfeld is the New York Times bestselling author of the novels Prep, The Man of My Dreams, American Wife, Sisterland, Eligible, and Rodham, which have been translated into 30 languages. Her story collection, You Think It, I'll Say It, was a Reese Witherspoon book club pick. She's the 2020 guest editor for the Best American Short Stories. Her work has been published in The New Yorker, The New York Times, Esquire, and more. A native of Cincinnati, she currently lives with her family in Minneapolis. So as we can all imagine, polite applause ringing out in everyone's home. Nelson, if you'd be so kind as to start us off with a little reading, that'd be great.
Okay, all right. Get the spectacles on. I'm going to read chapter 9 from The Darkest Hearts. It's called DNA, which is, and it's the title comes from a Kendrick Lamar song. Dee was on a treadmill at the Sunset Boulevard Equinox, watching CNN on one of the big screens hanging from the ceiling. Another Black man shot by the police. But the headline of the day was Trump firing FBI Director James Comey. More blood on the ground, more lawlessness in DC. Bright LA sun came in from the big windows. Women in form-fitting, multicolored workout leotards sashayed by with Kim Kardashian eyebrows. Men monitored each other's reps and talked of parties past and future. Dee was in the middle of this well-appointed workout facility, one of the few Black male clients. Dee's body was on a treadmill, but his mind was several million miles away. Trayvon Martin in Florida, Eric Garner in New York City, Michael Brown in Ferguson, Laquan McDonald in Chicago, Tamir Rice in Cleveland, Walter Scott in South Carolina, Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge, Philando Castile in Minnesota. Those are just the 21st century names that pop into his head. But you could go all the way back to Emmett Till in 1955, and to go back to the boys, men, girls, and women who'd been lynched, whose broken, charred, and disfigured bodies hung like tortured Black leaves on southern trees. All those white folks gathered as if for a picnic or a town fair to enjoy state-sanctioned murder. With the legacy of authorized death that began with overseers and slavery days that had never really stopped. It had just transformed with the times, part of our national language like baseball and guns. Though all Black people were subject to this violence, there seemed to be a special role in this serialized drama for the destruction of Black men, especially from adolescence to mid-40s. What is a surprise that gangs have proliferated? The protections of Black male life are so suspect that any form of community, no matter how self-destructive, is attractive in a world where your every affirmative gesture made you suspect. Dee had been in a long-distance relationship with a makeup woman working at Black Entertainment Television back when they were in Washington, D.C. Cheryl had taken a liking to the big man dressed in black and given her business card, saying he could use a bit of powder on his bald dome. Dee had happily taken the bait and began chatting with her on the phone, which quickly escalated to Amtrak weekend rendezvous in New York and D.C. To hit a museum and have dinner, But once they'd entered the apartment, a kiss became a nibble and then a full meal on her mudcloth spread. Cheryl and Dee had tremendous chemistry, and he'd wondered afterward whether they had a future. It was fall, and Dee had worn a black leather jacket he was zipping up when they stepped outside her apartment building. 3 DC police cruisers screeched up to the curb. Cops pulled out guns drawn. Cheryl screamed. A white cop pointed an automatic at Dee's face. He took a deep breath. He could see right down the barrel. Dee put up his hands, which were then pulled behind his back and cuffed. It was a multiracial bunch of police, but the man in charge was white and had officers' bars. He was stuffed into the back of a cruiser. You could hear Cheryl yelling at the police, but Dee stayed calm. Next to him was another black man about his age wearing a shiny brown leather jacket. The car pulled off and Dee craned his neck to see Cheryl being restrained by an officer. Between the policeman in the front seat and the guy next to him, Dee figured out there'd been a robbery by, quote, a black man in a black leather jacket, and they were headed for a lineup. Dee, who'd seen so many family, friends, and clients in similar situations, worked to suppress any anxiety at being one trigger finger away from death. He told himself he hadn't been shot and he hadn't robbed anybody, and a witness who could give cops intimate details of his actions in the last few hours to make the station house envious. Dee had even smiled, trying to focus on that truth, and not the reality that he was sitting in a hard seat in the back of a police car with his hands cuffed, and the circulation in his fingers disappearing. The cruiser stopped at a curb and Dee was pulled out and made to stand motionless with a policeman holding his arm. A black man, an employee or a customer, stuck his head out of the store and looked at Dee and nodded, yes, he had robbed the store. Now Dee's cool front collapsed and he began speaking rapidly. He'd been with Cheryl, how wrong that crazy motherfucker in the store was. He was trying to think of anyone he knew in DC, someone on the force or even an attorney. A weekend in the DC jail was not what he had in mind when he arrived at Cheryl's place. Thankfully, 2 more people came out of the store and both shook their heads. Dee was not the perpetrator. The handcuffs came off, and Dee felt his butt cheeks unclench. The officers walked over to Dee and asked him if he'd like a ride back to where they picked him up. There was no way he was going back in that cruiser. Good luck, bro, he said to the brother in the brown jacket, headed back in toward Cheryl's place. He wasn't sure where he was going, but any place was better than where he'd been. So that's that.
Thank you very much, Nelson. That was great. Emily, do you want to take it from there?
Sure. I am going to read a little bit from chapter 6 of the Cactus League. It's about baseball. There's a bunch of names, but what you need to know is just that they're all wives and girlfriends of ball players on the Los Angeles Lions. Liana Goodyear, the former wife of Jason Goodyear, is a perfect example of the problem associated with the divorce. Jason, handsome enough to contend for sexiest man in America, clean cut enough to be, rumor had it, in development talks with Disney, had 2 American League MVP awards and nary a smear on his rap sheet when he plucked this elementary school teacher out of thin air. Whirlwind courtship, a family-only wedding in an undisclosed location. And just like that, one of the country's most eligible bachelors was off the market. Liana quit working and did her best at all the baseball wife duties, attending games, keeping house, befriending the other baseball wives. They were married for a scant 2 seasons. Official word was mutual consent, the split called amicable. But to most baseball wives, it seemed too clean a break. Was he having an affair? Trouble in bed? The media pushed hypotheses. This was one of people's sexiest humans of 2009, after all. Of course, there would be gossip, but the ex-couple stayed mum. The baseball wives were stuck in the same dark room as the Inquirer. The wives knew Jason moved out and that Liana had kept the Arizona house. Maggie had run into Liana at the shopping center and gleaned as much. Liana told Maggie she didn't know where Jason was staying for the spring. Don't care, she added with a toss of her hair, like that line could hold any water at all. And for some inexplicable reason, she'd gone back to work. First grade, she said, smiling as if she liked all those snot-nosed kids and their germs climbing on her 5 days a week. In public school, when Maggie told Melissa that, the older woman gasped. She took him to the cleaners, the woman whispered, and he gladly consented to be scrubbed, soaped, and tumble-dried, conceding much more than their prenup had outlined. By the second week of spring, rumor had it that he was broke, and as impossible as that seems. Where could all of that money have gone? None of the wives can get any more information out of their husbands. If they broach the subject, the men get stern-faced and say, leave him be. It's like they all caught the outfielder's stiff-lippedness, his reticence. Over weekday mimosas, they continue to weigh the possibilities, that he is gay, that she is, that they realize they are distant cousins. It is complicated by the fact that no one really knows Goodyear. On the field, in the dugout, he's the strong, silent type, more desperado than amigo. His entire game day replete with routine and superstitious traditions that no one dare interrupt. He'd never once been out with Leon and never had them over to his home. Being private is one thing, but the baseball wives, they're practically family. Is he too good for them? Lisa mentions the wives' reputation for opulence, for having wild nights. Maybe, she gingerly suggests, he is trying to stay away from compromising situations. There are commercials to consider, shoe deals. I heard he just signed with Nike. Melissa glares across the table. There's more than one reason a man will keep his nose clean, she says. Sponsorship opportunities, sure. Her husband, surly on the mound and haggard looking even after a good night's rest, has done very few corporate promotions over the years, while Jason's face is plastered everywhere. If she's being honest with herself, Melissa Moyers will admit it is a brilliant brand building. Herb Allison, Jason's agent, has always been good at that. For now, she holds up a pinky, but maybe he has a little something to hide. That would explain his holier-than-thou behavior and the divorce. The women cackle at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. And finally, Curtis, if you would please read.
Okay, so my novel, the premise of it is if Hillary, then Rodham, had never married Bill Clinton, but they did still, in my version, they did still meet and fall in love. And this is in 1970. It's basically the beginning of the book. The first time I saw him, I thought he looked like a lion. He was 6'2", though I knew then only that he was tall. And in fact, his height seemed even greater because he was big tall, not skinny tall. He had broad shoulders and a large head, and his hair was several inches longer than it would be later, which drew attention to its coppery color. His beard was the same shade. I suppose I thought he looked like a handsome lion, but even from a distance, he seemed full of himself in a way that canceled out his handsomeness. He seemed like a person who took up more than his share of oxygen. This sighting took place in Yale Law School's student lounge in the fall of 1970, my second year of law school and his first. I was with my friend Nick, and Bill was speaking in his loud, husky, Southern accented voice to a group of 5 or 6 other students. With great enthusiasm, he declared, and not only that, we grow the biggest watermelons in the world. Nick and I looked at each other and began laughing. Who is that? I whispered. Bill Clinton, Nick whispered back. He's from Arkansas, and that's all he ever talks about. The next thing Nick told me was actually at Yale Law School less notable than being from Arkansas. He was a Rhodes Scholar. I think I'll stop there.
All right, thanks everyone, that was great. So, the topic of icons of American culture, the way that can be interpreted differently according to each of your books. So let's sort of figure out what we think that means. But I'll start with some broad questions, and then I have some more specific ones. But we can start with a question that's directed to all of you, and that's what distinct or unique feature of American culture did you want, or culture or iconography, did you want to reflect in your book? And Emily, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. Well, it's a baseball book. I'm writing about spring training. I think I wanted to interrogate the mode of the baseball novel. Almost always it's either the bottom of the ninth or the end of the series, surely the end of the season. So inverting that and thinking about sports narratives at the beginning, at the start, and where the narrative energy and the tension is in the spring. And particularly Jason, I probably should have set this up, but he's a $200 million man. He's a generational player. the entire team is staked on him. So I wanted to think about sports culture, not just the dynamics of a team, but and the 26, I guess now, 25 and 2011, but not just the guys on the bench, but in the field, but the many sort of concentric circles of support mechanisms for that team. So the front office, the coaching staff, the wives, the concession workers, you know, all the way out into the parking lot of the stadium. And so thinking about, you know, the icon would be that generational athlete, but then also sort of studying the ripple effect of what happens when things go awry for one really important person in the constellation of a team.
And Nelson, how about you?
My book deals, all this sort of noir music books I've been doing deals with the relationship between stardom and capitalism and responsibility. And so one of the key characters in the book is a huge Southern rap star. So that's an emerging kind of character, the Southern rap star from Atlanta. It's a very particular kind of artist, different from the old school New York guys. And the book kind of pivots around a question. He is managed by my central character, D. Hunter, who doesn't really like Southern rap, but wants to be part, but that's what's happening now, and he's managing people, so he's got to be down. And they're offered a contract to basically create, to be part of a liquor launch, kind of like what Diddy's done, except we call it the Ciroc of the South, is what they call this beverage. And it comes up that the company, the president, the CEO of this company that's running this beverage is a huge neoconservative who supports private prisons, who is involved in voter suppression and all kinds of good stuff like that. And it becomes a question of, do we take this guy's money or do we not? And so I wanted to look at this idea about what responsibility does a star have to himself, his integrity, and his constituency. And at the same time, also to sort of echoing what was said earlier, the people behind him, and D is his manager now. So what is his responsibility within that? Is it to his client, his well-being? Is it to the general community? And where does his self-interest come involved? So I think this idea of these big stars and these big figures, what is their responsibility to the general culture is something that I'm really interested in.
Absolutely. And Curtis?
Well, I think that I definitely wanted to write a political novel, meaning a novel explicitly about politics. You know, in some ways, I was very literal about the premise of my novel. You know, like what if Hillary and Bill hadn't gotten married? And then in some ways, I wasn't literal. And I think that actually, if they hadn't gotten married, I think it's very plausible she wouldn't have entered, you know, political life herself. But in the novel, like I felt like that's what I wanted it to be about. Because in some ways, I think that the system we have for running for president is so crazy in so many ways that almost like if it didn't already exist and someone invented it in a novel, it would seem like a very implausible novel. And just like, you know, there's so much that's like ridiculous and absurd and you know, sort of irrelevant. And so I wanted to make it to sort of capture what it's like to run for high office in the present day. And you know, kind of hold a mirror up to that.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting that politics came up immediately. I had some political questions, but you know, since it's come up sort of right off the bat, we can get to another question, and that's, you know, Nelson, I was interested to hear you refer to a star's constituency. That's not really a word you hear associated with someone other than a politician, but I think you're right to use it. And it sort of leads me perfectly to my question, which is that how, in all of your opinions, how does politics fit in with culture? Because it's obviously part of what we call culture, but it seems to have a unique position. Is politics downstream from culture, or is culture a reaction to political realities? Does anyone feel like they want to take that one first?
I would just say that it kind of depends on the artist, in my opinion, and their sort of representation and where they are. A band like Public Enemy from the go was we're about politics, and we're about messaging about politics. Someone as confused as Kanye West actually stumbles upon every now and then saying something really smart politically, along with about 15 things that are totally idiotic. So, it kind of depends on the artist's intention. Some artists are explicitly political. Some artists go out of their way to be non-political. But even those who try to be non-political often end up sending a very powerful message about whether it's consensus or commodification, or even just the fact that they're avoiding politics is in fact a statement about politics. So I think that it's always there, but I don't know if it's a general thing. I think you have to look at each artist's body of work and their personas, and you kind of make a judgment from that. At least that's the way I look at it.
Right. I think in my book, it's set in 2011, and baseball has always sort of lagged behind other professional sports in terms of political engagement. I think this summer has been interesting to see all the major sports evolving quickly in that way. But so I don't know that there are particularly political athletes in my book or the aspects of that, but I did want to talk about race and class and pretty pointedly interrogate some of the real problems of contemporary professional sports and
I should mention the 2008 crash and the housing.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of housing insecurity and people trying to establish homes either because they're, temporarily in Arizona or because they've gotten wiped out in the recession. And so I think in that way, it's a hand mirror to use, I think, Curtis's phrase, but reflecting the political moment.
Sure. And Curtis, your book's probably the most overtly political, but I wonder if you have an opinion on that.
I mean, I think that I agree with both of my co-panelists. I mean, I especially what Nelson was saying, that it's almost like a book can be overtly political, but even a sort of non-political book actually is political. And I mean, as a fiction writer, it's funny because I think that when I was in my 20s, I almost, and I'm 45 now, I almost feel like I maybe could have gone down like a non-fictional path or a fictional path in my career. And I feel like I picked fiction. And so even though I think the questions that you're asking are really interesting and relevant, it's not how I approach my own work. Like I can say I wanted, sorry, my phone's sorry that my landline is ringing. I'm sure my dad is calling because no one else calls.
He's probably saying you're doing great on the question.
I
could answer and he could weigh in. But I think, sorry, it'll stop in a second. I mean, I feel like that even though when asked this, I'll say I wanted to write a political novel, and that's true. But I actually think of my novels in terms of, or any fiction in terms of constructing a plot. And if I'm trying to construct a sort of realistic plot with a person, who's engaging with the world, I think political issues and issues of race, gender, class, economics, will always come up because those are part of the fabric of everyone's lives.
Right. And, I think it's interesting, Curtis, that, like I said, that your book was most overtly political. It really takes kind of the stage of politics as we recognize it from CNN or something, but really tells, I read it as more of a personal tragedy or a kind of aching, it's not, or something very sort of human in a way that it could have, the character didn't necessarily have to be a career politician or something. I think that sort of similar themes would have still applied. But Emily, you brought something up that leads me to a question that I had for you, and that's about the sort of one or two or three in a generation iconic athlete. I think we probably have about 4 or 5 at any time, maybe less. But iconic athletes occupy an interesting place in the culture because they contribute, at least primarily or at first with only their bodies, and their thoughts or opinions they come next, and to some people they may be inconvenient. There's some people would say something like "shut up and dribble" or something like that. And how do you think the role of iconic American athlete has evolved over the history of sports in America?
Well, I think it's evolved per sport. I was thinking mostly about baseball, which has been on the decline. Even, the generational athlete now doesn't really have the cultural capital he did one or two generations ago. And I'm definitely addressing sort of the nostalgia of people missing the relevancy of baseball in general discourse, and that's a vein through the book.
Sorry to interrupt, but we might be missing it's been a while since we've had an iconic baseball.
I grew up in Seattle in the 80s.
Yeah.
So Ken Griffey Jr. was, really vital to my childhood, and I think he's a good example of a generational player. But, there's a character here that is obsessed still 50 years, 60 years later with Joe DiMaggio. There's, so thinking about, but I think, to Nelson's point, we can say generational, we can have expectations of the athlete, of the artist, but each one's an individual. And, I think that, they excel at sport, and that's, a certain kind of intelligence, but that's not their only kind of intelligence, of course. And so the pigeonholing of athletes, or the expectation of, shut up and dribble, that I hope that's done. I hope that never happens, or that stops, because I think athletes are, intelligent in, they've got this physical ability, and they've honed that, but they're individuals and have a life off the court and off the field, and if they want to leverage their professional position, they should.
Nelson, do you have any opinion on that? In similar, I know that an athlete can often be a managed talent, much like the talents that
yeah, to your point you just made, Willie Mays is still Willie Mays.
Yeah.
But Mike Trout is not Willie Mays, even though he is equivalent, statistically,
right.
to Willie in a lot of respects.
Right.
So there's these people. It's so interesting because in a book like mine, I'm dealing with the right now. But even one of the subplots in the novel is about an R&B singer who was big in the 90s, and the 90s was when basically hip hop swallowed or subsumed R&B, and now Drake's a goddamn singer, as bad as that may be. And I grew up with Al Green and Teddy Pendergrass, and incredible. But Drake is the love man of his generation, so that shows you how things change. So that there's almost no, I guess The Weeknd is probably the biggest singer. Harry Styles is coming up now, and he's got has a great presence, but. The singer as icon, the way that Frank Sinatra, all the way through soul music, and all through, doesn't exist exactly the same way. That Drake or Kanye or some of these other hip hop figures are now the dominant sort of male presences in the pop culture space, unless you're singing through auto-tune, So these things shift, and then for me, so one of the characters is a guy named Knight, and he's basically this R&B guy who's trying to figure out, how do I become relevant? How do I, in this new age where what I do isn't valued anymore by the popular space? So it's an ongoing, it's an issue, I think, throughout the culture, actually.
Mm-hmm. And we've been discussing icons and sort of what it means to be an icon in America. So this leads me to the next question, and maybe Curtis, we can start with you. But what is the price of fame in America? Obviously, you're writing about a very famous person, and the character becomes equally famous. And what do you give up when you become an icon in this country?
That's an excellent question. So it's funny because I feel like in this book, but also in other, short stories or whatever, I feel like I end up writing about fame a lot, and I almost wonder why. And I mean, it seems largely undesirable. I mean, obviously it has its perks, but it seems largely undesirable. So I don't think I'm like fetishizing it. But one of the things that I'm sort of struck by with Hillary specifically, who, even though I'm like, Hillary, as if we're friends, I've never met her, but that we tend to treat famous people as if they only exist when we are observing them. And that, you know, if a politician isn't giving a speech or isn't like tweeting or something, it's almost like they don't exist. And I feel like that's a sort of strange impulse and can make us be not very generous or sympathetic toward, you know, anyone famous. Like it's as if they only exist for our entertainment, even though, I mean, there's also the weirdness of like, you know, with social media, that some famous people being so, you know, open and in a very controlled way and giving us this illusion of intimacy. And, but I do think that I'm really interested in exploring almost like the private side of a public person, like, you know, not giving a speech, not even pretending to do, you know, like whatever, like eating pie in my kitchen, but it's like the thing that you don't even post on social media, because I do think that, you know, everyone is very complex and everyone makes a choice about how much to disclose or not disclose.
Right. You know, I think, was it Bill Murray who someone approached and said, man, I'd like to be rich and famous like you. And I believe he said, just try being rich first. Yeah.
What does that mean? Like the famous part, isn't that you know?
Fame,
like,
yeah, I could do without the fame, but the rich.
Oh, like all the perks come from.
Listen, I have a couple of friends who are famous, and they would say the same thing. Mm. I mean, they'd rather be the guy who made millions with the paper, controlling paper clips, than because the guy controlling paper clips has the same lifestyle as most famous people. Mm-hmm. He has a big house. He can probably get his way into nice restaurants, but no one asks him for his autograph or takes pictures of him and posts it on the internet when he's out on a date.
Right. So my personal philosophy has been it's better to be the friend of the guy with the boat than the guy with the boat. So he's got to deal with the winter and stuff and pay the taxes on it.
But I say twice a year. One more thing about this is that the thing about fame is people are asking people to pay attention to us. Now, the musician doesn't necessarily start out that way, but eventually often they do. The athlete, you know, at some point there's a plea or a request on the part of the individual to be paid attention to. But that door, once you open it, is not a one-way door. And once you open the door to pay attention to me and what I do, or you have a machine for a publicist or whatever that does that, you can't put that genie back in the bottle. And your life has changed completely and irrevocably once you've achieved fame.
Yeah, for me, I made up this baseball team, the Los Angeles Lions, and I felt like it was really important to put them in LA because I wanted to think about that intersection of athletic performance, but celebrity culture, and to have, you know, these athletes that are asked to sort of jump tracks and face paparazzi. Think about, you know, what it means to be tracked that way and analyzed. It's not cute. I think it's really, to Bill Murray's point.
Right. You know, this is something I want to get into almost on a personal level, but all four of us are novelists. And these days, novels can really feel like the sort of, well, not these days, the past 10 or 20 years or so, novels can feel like the forgotten stepchildren of American culture. What do you think the novel has to offer the dominant media, such as TV, movies, et cetera, these days that they can't?
I mean, everyone, you know, the funny thing is that, you know, well, people say people don't read novels, but every miniseries, every long-term quality TV show says it's novelistic, or it feels like a novel. So the ideas of storytelling that novels represent as an idea are still very present. It's just that people don't read them very much.
Right. And they're based on, at least someone read it, but whoever optioned that show is called Novelistic.
Exactly. So that's the funny thing I find, because I work a little bit in Hollywood, and even I'm working on a documentary with some guys, and it's a documentary series, and it's got to be novelistic, it's got to have an epic scope. But have you guys ever read a book? So these are the kind of things. I mean, it's a weird place to be, because it's kind of we're very present, but not actually. I wouldn't say respected is the right word, but not kind of taken as intimately into people's lives, and many people's lives, as the products that are sort of inspired by it.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. I think that for me, like, this is a very, I don't know, uninspiring answer, but partly, like I live in the Midwest, and my life is not structured in such a way that I could write for TV. And I think it's like a rite of passage that maybe most novelists at some point like write a screenplay or, write a pilot. And I have done that unsuccessfully. But for me, I mean, it feels like I feel like it's taken me a while, but I've figured out how to write novels. And if I write a novel, there's a 95% chance it will be published, and I can do it by myself. And I think this doesn't reflect well on me, but I think I don't enjoy collaborating. I can sit alone for years at a time. And so it's almost like, certainly I've encountered tons of people who say like, oh, I haven't been able to read during quarantine at all. And I think like, that's okay. Like, I don't feel like it's really my job to justify the novel's existence. It's more that I feel very lucky that I get to do it, and it's compatible with my life. And, like, I'm going to take that as far as I can.
Yeah. I would agree with both of your guys' points, the sort of pragmatic, this is what I can do, and also the core concept of storytelling. I think for me, another really magical thing about the novel is it's self-contained. One person can make it, one person can share it, but it's also it's building sentences, and not to get too gooey about adjectives or sentence structure, but like the idea that you can build a whole world, that you can make a statement, that you can create a character that someone will fall in love with and remember for years, but also you can, create a commentary that makes us think differently about these things we've taken for granted or never knew anything about, and that all of that can be contained within the covers. It's just a really powerful tool, and to do that artfully as well is just such an opportunity. So, I mean, I've been binging plenty of TV too, but I think that the possibility of, the one-to-one connection of a writer putting down their ideas about the world and sharing that is still very powerful.
That's great. Thank you. You've all gave me some excellent inspiration to finish my second novel. So thank you.
Can I echo what Emily is saying? Like, I really agree with that there is, I mean, again, it's like, of course, who among us doesn't like, watching TV and movies? I already watched like all of Saturday Night Live from last night, before lunch today. But there is, I think that there is something so special that, I think I've heard it referred to as like one soul speaking to another, where like, and again, like, this is not to disparage a movie, but obviously because it's collaborative, you're not sure like what came from where or something, but you kind of, there's something, in most books that I read, I would say, even I can admire it and it doesn't feel like it's speaking directly to me, but sometimes it does feel like it's speaking directly to me. And that's such a like beautiful, special, and you just think like, I'm glad this person exists, like maybe the person died 100 years ago, maybe they're still alive, but I'll never meet them. But it's still like a very special thing where, your sensibility as a reader and someone's sensibility as a writer are very kind of compatible.
And there's one more question before we go to Q&A. So before I ask that question, I can remind any viewers at home that now would be the time to ask some questions in the chat. It's a little sparse at the moment, so hopefully someone can come up with something. I think my father's out there watching, so Dad, you could help me out and throw me a question. Otherwise, I can go into my stockpile of further questions. But Nelson, we only have a few minutes left, but I definitely wanted to broach this subject because we can't talk about American culture without talking about Black American culture. And it seems as if what's called American culture has always lagged behind Black culture, emulating it, commodifying it, or often just frankly stealing from it. And I was wondering, to what extent do you think American culture and Black American culture are separable?
It's all American culture. There is no Black American culture. I mean, and I say that having written a ton of books about Black American culture, but ultimately they're all products of this very weirdly both integrated and segregated place we call America. And the synthesis of, we always talk about Black music, but a good example of the weird synthesis is the saxophone. Saxophone is a classical instrument. It's from I think the 18th century, maybe Germany, I think. Alfred Sax, I believe, is the first saxophone guy. And it was a kind of classical instrument that lay fallow for who used the saxophone really in a classical piece. At some point during the early part of the 20th century, some brother picked it up somewhere and said, hey, this makes a good sound. And suddenly this instrument, which had been really obscure, becomes like an iconic kind of piece of, American music making, a saxophone. So it's always this relationship between what Europe created sonically, perhaps, or what the instruments are, and the sensibilities of this country. And what's funny, of course, is that we always say, well, what about African music? Well, there's something that happened on this piece of land that's unique. That's why our music is very unique and travels all over the damn place. Continues to evolve into different things. So I don't really see much separation. I think sometimes it's easy to attract attention using jazz and blues and these words, but ultimately it's all products of the American experience. And that makes it to be terrible, but it's still a product of that. And I think it's always, I always worry we separate them too much to make Black this thing, because ultimately it all ends up in the middle. It all ends up among all of us.
All right. Well, in our remaining few minutes here, I'll turn to the Q&A. Let's see. I've been sort of scrolling, and we got a few. Let's see. Here's a question for Curtis, and I hope you don't mind a somewhat combative question. Not really, but a little bit. Let's call it interesting. And it's from someone named Maddie. Curtis, what would you say to people who take issue with the sexual parts of Rodham because Hillary is a living person who they imagine may take issue with it?
So there are some sex scenes in Rodham. It's funny because recently, like a relative of mine texted me and said, like my book club mostly enjoyed Rodham, but they were a little, I think it was like maybe uncomfortable with the sex scenes. And I like adore this relative. And I thought to myself, I don't know, was the goal of my novel to make your book club comfortable? I'm not so sure it was. Like, I think that it's I think there's a taste, and I don't mean even decorum. I mean more like what people do or don't enjoy in their reading. But so I really wanted to convincingly portray this couple in their early 20s falling in love. And I felt like the physical part of that seemed really normal and natural. And because of the premise of like, then they break up, it seemed like, of course it would be in there. And I think there are some people who maybe don't read that many novels and aren't aware that there are actually plenty of sex scenes and plenty of novels. But I don't think that it really I mean, I do know that there are people who like would prefer the book without it or think it's weird, but I don't really think that reflects strangely on Hillary. I think it reflects strangely on me, and I'm okay. Like, it's almost like saying if Kate McKinnon is playing Hillary on Saturday Night Live and makes some like strange expression or says something like, you know, how does Hillary feel about that? And it's like, well, and I really admire her, but it's not, the intent is not like it's sort of a cultural conversation and not a conversation between Kate McKinnon and Hillary. Was that your dad's question? No, I'm just kidding.
No, I don't know. I'll ask him later, but
or was it my
just about out of time. We're just about out of time, but I'll ask one more, and you know, people can jump in if they feel like it. And it's about the future of the icon, or if the icon will continue. And it's this from someone who goes by Nuwanka. In the age of social media, do you believe that there are still homes for the icon of the future in our hearts, the same way they existed in the past? I like the way that's worded. I don't know if our hearts can hold icons the same way.
Well, we keep making them. I mean, I think that every generation, I mean, like the movie star of the 40s was different from the TV star, sitcom star of the 60s, which is different from the blockbuster star of the 80s. And the social media, I think each medium, we like icons. We have idols. And each is shifted by the medium on which they relate. I mean, you know, who's a good example? I mean, like LeBron James, you know, we talk about sports a bit. You know, LeBron would not be as big as he was if he wasn't A, socially active, and B, if he wasn't very active on social media. He's become a guy who actually influences people, what songs they buy, because people follow his kind of playlist. So that's something that's inconceivable for Willie Mays, you know, or, I mean, we love Muhammad Ali, but we don't know what records he listened to, you know? So each age, I think, defines their icons through how the media and how they relate to their audience. And so I think for someone who's 20-something or 25, they have their icons, they have people who are going, and they're relating to them in the way that they do, which would be totally foreign to the way I do. So I think definitely we're gonna continue to have them, and they'll be in people's hearts.
Yeah, I agree. Hopefully, you know, we won't be looking at them on Instagram forever, but they'll still be around.
Exactly.
So, you know, I'm receiving word that we were running a little over time, and the stream may get cut off. So I want to take this chance to just formal goodbye and thanks to all our viewers.
Thank you. It was great to have you.
I encourage you to buy everyone's
everybody.
book. It's really fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, peace.
Bye.
So long, y'all.